Intro. The Supermarine Spitfire, a remarkable British single-seat fighter plane, left an indelible mark on aviation history. Serving the Royal Air Force and other Allied nations before, during, and after the Second World War, this iconic aircraft became a symbol of British resilience and ingenuity. From the initial Mk1 variant to the powerful Rolls Royce Griffon-engined Mk24, the Spitfire underwent continuous development, featuring various wing configurations and armament options. Its unique distinction lies in being the sole British fighter to be manufactured without interruption throughout the war years. The Spitfire's journey began at the drawing board of R.J. Mitchell, the brilliant chief designer at Supermarine Aviation Works. His vision was to create a short-range interceptor that could outperform its contemporaries, including the Hawker Hurricane. The key to the Spitfire's exceptional performance lay in its distinctive elliptical wing, conceived by Beverly Shenstone. With its innovative sunken rivets and the thinnest possible cross-section, the wing design allowed the Spitfire to achieve unprecedented speeds. Mitchell's untimely death in 1937 did not halt the aircraft's evolution, as his successor, Joseph Smith, diligently oversaw its development through numerous iterations. During the pivotal Battle of Britain in 1940, the Spitfire shared the spotlight with the more numerous Hurricane in the public eye. However, the Spitfire proved to be a superior fighter, boasting a lower attrition rate and a higher victory-to-loss ratio. Its exceptional performance allowed it to engage the Luftwaffe's formidable Messerschmitt Bf 109E fighters on equal terms. Beyond the Battle of Britain, the Spitfire became the backbone of the RAF Fighter Command, seeing action across various theaters of war, from Europe to the Mediterranean, and even in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Pilots who flew the Spitfire developed a deep affection for the aircraft, which excelled in diverse roles such as interceptor, photo-reconnaissance, fighter-bomber, and trainer. Its adaptability and longevity were further showcased by the Seafire, a carrier-based variant that served in the Fleet Air Arm from 1942 until the mid-1950s. The Spitfire's airframe, initially designed around the 1,030 horsepower Rolls Royce Merlin engine, proved robust and versatile enough to accommodate increasingly powerful Merlins and later, the mighty Rolls Royce Griffon engines, which could produce up to 2,340 horsepower. This ability to evolve with advancing technology ensured that the Spitfire remained a formidable force throughout its service life, cementing its status as an aviation icon. Production and development. In the early 1930s, the British Air Ministry was in search of a modern fighter plane to replace the aging Gloucester Gauntlet biplane. They issued specification F7/30, which called for an aircraft capable of reaching a top speed of 250 miles per hour, 400 kilometers per hour. R.J. Mitchell, a talented designer at Supermarine, took on the challenge and created the Type 224. However, this open cockpit monoplane with its bulky gull wings and large, fixed undercarriage failed to impress the Air Ministry, which instead chose the Gloucester Gladiator biplane for service. Undeterred by this setback, Mitchell and his team immediately set to work on a series of improved designs, drawing inspiration from their experience with Schneider Trophy seaplanes. Their efforts led to the creation of the Type 300, featuring retractable undercarriage and a reduced wingspan. Despite these improvements, the Air Ministry rejected the design in July 1934. Refusing to give up, Mitchell continued to refine the aircraft, incorporating an enclosed cockpit, oxygen-breathing apparatus, and the newly developed Rolls-Royce PV-12 V12 engine, later named the Merlin. With the backing of Supermarine's owner, Vickers Armstrong, Mitchell began detailed design work on this enhanced version of the Type 300 in November 1934. The Air Ministry, recognizing the potential of Mitchell's design, issued a contract in December 1934, providing £10,000 for the construction of the improved Type 300. Further modifications were made in response to new specifications, including an increase in armament to 8 guns and a reduction in fuel capacity. On March 5, 1936, the prototype, K5054, took to the skies for the first time from Eastleigh Aerodrome, with Captain Joseph Mutt Summers at the controls. This maiden flight took place just 4 months after the first flight of the Hawker Hurricane, another iconic British fighter. Subsequent test flights revealed that the Spitfire, as it came to be known, was a highly capable aircraft, albeit with some minor issues such as an oversensitive rudder. Improvements, including a new propeller design, allowed the Spitfire to reach speeds of up to 348 miles per hour, 557 kilometers per hour, in level flight. Impressed by the Spitfire's performance, the Air Ministry placed an order for 310 aircraft on June 3, 1936, even before receiving the formal report from the Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment. This decision marked the beginning of the Spitfire's journey to becoming one of the most iconic fighter planes in history. The Spitfire made its public debut at the RAF Hendon Air Display on June 27, 1936, generating significant interest among the British people. However, the path to full-scale production was not without its challenges. Despite Vickers Armstrong's director, Sir Robert Maclean, guaranteeing a production rate of 5 aircraft per week beginning 15 months after receiving an order, the first production Spitfire, K9787, did not roll off the assembly line at the Woolston, Southampton facility until mid-1938. The Air Ministry had placed an order for 310 aircraft on June 3, 1936, at a cost of £1,395,000. However, Supermarine, being a small company already engaged in building Walrus and Stranraer flying boats, and Vickers, occupied with Wellington bomber production, struggled to meet the promised 15-month deadline. To expedite the process, the initial solution was to subcontract the work. However, Vickers Armstrongs was hesitant to release the necessary blueprints and subcomponents to outside contractors, causing further delays in the Spitfire's production. As a result of these setbacks, the Air Ministry proposed halting Spitfire production after the initial order of 310 aircraft and having Supermarine build Bristol Beaufighters instead. However, the management teams at Supermarine and Vickers convinced the Air Ministry that the production issues could be resolved, leading to an additional order for 200 Spitfires on March 24, 1938. The first production Spitfire finally took to the skies on May 15, 1938, piloted by Geoffrey Quill, nearly 24 months after the initial order was placed. The total cost of the first 310 aircraft, accounting for delays and increased program costs, amounted to £1,870,242, or £1,533 more per aircraft than originally estimated. A single production Spitfire cost approximately £9,500, with the hand-fabricated fuselage being the most expensive component at around £2,500, followed by the Rolls Royce Merlin engine at £2,000, the wings at £1,800 a pair, guns and undercarriage at £800 each, and the propeller at £350. In 1935, the British Air Ministry approached Morris Motors Limited to inquire about the feasibility of quickly converting their Cowley plant to aircraft production. By 1936, this informal request had evolved into a formal scheme known as the Shadow Factory Plan, aimed at boosting British aircraft production capacity under the guidance of Herbert Austin. Austin was tasked with constructing 9 new factories and enhancing the British car manufacturing industry to increase overall capacity and enable the production of aircraft and their engines. Construction of the Castle Bromwich Aircraft Factory, CBAF, began in 1938, adjacent to the aerodrome. Installation of state-of-the-art machine tools commenced 2 months later. Despite Morris Motors, led by Lord Nuffield, managing and equipping the factory, the government provided the necessary funding. By early 1939, the factory's initial estimated cost of £2 million had more than doubled. Even as the first Spitfires were being built in June 1940, the factory remained incomplete and faced personnel issues. The Spitfire's stress skin construction demanded precision engineering skills and techniques that exceeded the capabilities of the local workforce, necessitating retraining. Problems arose when management disregarded Supermarine's tooling and drawings in favor of their own, and workers repeatedly threatened strikes or slowdowns until their demands for higher wages were met. Despite promises of producing 60 Spitfires per week starting in April, Castle Bromwich had not built its first Spitfire by May 1940. On May 17, Minister of Aircraft Production Lord Beaverbrook intervened, convincing Lord Nuffield to hand over control of the factory to his ministry. Beaverbrook immediately dispatched experienced management staff and workers from Supermarine and transferred control of the factory to Vickers Armstrongs. Although resolving the issues took time, production gradually increased, with 10 Mk2s built in June 1940, 23 in July, 37 in August, and 56 in September. By the end of production at Castle Bromwich in June 1945, a total of 12,129 Spitfires had been built, including 921 Mk2s, 4,489 Mk Versus, 5,665 Mk9s, and 1,054 Mk XVIs. The factory achieved a maximum production rate of 320 aircraft per month, making it the largest Spitfire factory in the UK and the most successful plant of its type during World War II. In an effort to cripple Spitfire production during the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe focused its attacks on the main manufacturing plants at Woolston and Itchen, near Southampton. The first bombing raid, which missed the factories, occurred on August 23, 1940. Subsequent raids followed, and on September 26, 1940, both factories were destroyed, resulting in 92 fatalities and many injuries, mostly among skilled aircraft production workers. Fortunately, many of the production jigs and machine tools had been relocated by September 20th, and measures were already underway to disperse production to smaller facilities throughout the Southampton area. The British government requisitioned various sites, such as Vincent's Garage in Reading, which later specialised in manufacturing Spitfire fuselages, and Anna Valley Motors in Salisbury, which became the sole producer of wing leading-edge fuel tanks for photo-reconnaissance Spitfires. A dedicated factory was built at Star Road, Caversham in Reading, focusing on manufacturing fuselages and installing engines. The design office responsible for all Spitfire blueprints was relocated to Hursley Park, near Winchester. This site also featured an aircraft assembly hangar where many prototype and experimental Spitfires were assembled, although no Spitfires ever flew from Hursley due to the lack of an associated aerodrome. 4 towns and their satellite airfields were selected as focal points for these dispersed workshops: Eastleigh Airport in Southampton, Salisbury with the High Post and Chatties Hill aerodromes, Trowbridge and RAF Keevil, and Reading's Henley and Aldermaston aerodromes. Completed Spitfires were transported to these airfields on Commer Queen Mary low loader trailers for final assembly and testing before being handed over to the RAF. An experimental factory in Newbury was targeted in a daylight raid by the Luftwaffe, but the bombs missed their intended target and struck a nearby school instead. Geoffrey Quill, Vickers Supermarine's chief test pilot during World War II, was responsible for flight testing all aircraft types manufactured by the company, including the Spitfire. He supervised a team of 10 to 12 pilots who were tasked with testing every developmental and production Spitfire built in the Southampton area. Quill established the standard testing procedures, which, with minor variations for specific aircraft designs, were used from 1938 onwards. At the Castle Bromwich factory, Alex Henshaw took on the role of chief test pilot in 1940. He was in charge of testing all Spitfires produced at that facility and managed a team of 25 pilots. Henshaw's responsibilities included assessing all Spitfire developments. Between 1940 and 1946, he personally flew an impressive total of 2,360 Spitfires and Seafires, accounting for more than 10% of the total production. The flight testing process was a crucial step in ensuring the quality and airworthiness of every Spitfire before they were delivered to the RAF. The dedication and expertise of test pilots like Geoffrey Quill and Alex Henshaw played a vital role in the success of the Spitfire program, as they worked tirelessly to evaluate and refine the iconic fighter plane throughout its production run. Henshaw's account of flight testing Spitfires provides valuable insights into the process and the aircraft's handling characteristics. After conducting a thorough pre-flight check, he would take off and trim the aircraft at circuit height to ensure it could fly straight and level without manual input. Once satisfied with the trim, Henshaw would put the Spitfire through a full-throttle climb to the rated altitude of the supercharger blowers, carefully checking the engine's power output, calibrated for height and temperature. If everything appeared satisfactory, he would then dive the aircraft at full power and 3,000 revolutions per minute, trimming it to fly hands and feet off at an indicated airspeed of 460 miles per hour, 740 kilometers per hour. Henshaw also made it a point to perform aerobatic tests on each Spitfire to assess its overall handling qualities. The production test was a relatively quick process, with the initial circuit lasting less than 10 minutes and the main flight taking between 20 and 30 minutes. After the flight, ground mechanics would give the aircraft a final inspection, rectify any faults, and prepare the Spitfire for collection. Henshaw expressed his love for the Spitfire in all its versions, but he noted that the later Marks, while faster, were also heavier, which negatively impacted their handling. He used the flick roll test to demonstrate this point, stating that the Mark II or Mark V could perform 2.5 flick rolls, while the heavier Mark IX could only manage 1.5. The even heavier later versions achieved even less. Henshaw acknowledged that aircraft design is a compromise, and improvements in one area of performance often come at the expense of deterioration in another. The Spitfire's production run was nothing short of remarkable, with the last aircraft rolling out in February 1948. By the end of its production, an impressive total of 20,351 Spitfires of all variants had been built, including 2-seat trainer versions. This iconic fighter plane remained in service well into the 1950s, a testament to its enduring design and capabilities. One of the most notable aspects of the Spitfire's history is that it was the only British fighter aircraft to be in continuous production before, during, and after World War II. This fact highlights the Spitfire's significance not only as a pivotal component of Britain's war effort but also as a symbol of the nation's resilience and technological prowess. The longevity of the Spitfire's production and service life is a clear indication of its adaptability and the ingenuity of its designers, who continually refined and improved the aircraft to meet the evolving demands of aerial warfare. From its early days as an interceptor during the Battle of Britain to its later roles as a fighter-bomber and reconnaissance aircraft, the Spitfire proved to be an indispensable asset to the Royal Air Force and other Allied air forces throughout the war and in the years that followed. Design. The Spitfire's airframe was a complex and sophisticated design that incorporated advanced construction techniques and materials for its time. The streamlined, semi-monocoque fuselage was made of duralumin, a strong aluminum alloy, and featured a series of compound curves built around a skeleton of 19 frames, also known as formers. These frames started just behind the propeller unit and extended to the tail unit attachment frame, providing the necessary structural support for the aircraft. The fuselage frame served various purposes, such as supporting the glycol header tank, engine cowlings, and the engine itself. Frame 5, a strengthened double frame, was particularly important as it supported the weight of the engine and its accessories, incorporated the fireproof bulkhead, and, in later Spitfire versions, the oil tank. This frame also connected the four main fuselage longerons to the rest of the airframe. The rear fuselage was made up of 9 oval-shaped frames, each incorporating lightning holes to minimize weight without compromising structural integrity. The tail unit was attached to frame 20, while frames 21, 22, and 23 formed the fin, with frame 22 housing the tailwheel opening and frame 23 serving as the rudder post. To create a light yet rigid structure, a combination of 14 longitudinal stringers and 4 main longerons were attached to the frames. Alclad stress skinning, which varied in thickness from 24 to 18 gauge, was then riveted to the structure, with the skin thickness decreasing towards the tail. Flush riveting was used in critical areas, such as the wing forward of the main spar, to ensure an uninterrupted airflow, and was later employed on the fuselage starting from February 1943. Initially, the ailerons, elevators, and rudder were fabric-covered, but combat experience revealed that fabric-covered ailerons were ineffective at high speeds. As a result, they were replaced with light alloy, improving control throughout the Spitfire's speed range. The Spitfire's airframe design was a testament to the ingenuity and expertise of its designers, who successfully created a high-performance fighter aircraft that could fully exploit the power of the Merlin engine while remaining relatively easy to fly. Mitchell and his design team at Supermarine chose a semi-elliptical wing shape for the Spitfire to address two conflicting requirements: the need for a thin wing to minimize drag and the need for a thick enough wing to accommodate the retractable undercarriage, armament, and ammunition. The elliptical planform is the most aerodynamically efficient shape for an untwisted wing, resulting in the lowest amount of induced drag. The elliptical shape was skewed to align the center of pressure, which occurs at the quarter chord position, with the main spar. This prevented the wings from twisting under aerodynamic loads. Some have suggested that Mitchell copied the wing shape from the Heinkel E-70, designed by the Gunnar brothers, which first flew in 1932. However, Beverly Shenstone, the aerodynamicist on Mitchell's team, refuted this claim, stating that the Spitfire's wing was much thinner and had a different section compared to the Heinkel's wing. Copying a wing shape designed for a different purpose would have been counterproductive. Shenstone explained that the elliptical wing shape was chosen early in the design process for its aerodynamic efficiency, as it produced the lowest induced drag when generating lift. The team aimed for the lowest possible thickness to chord ratio while maintaining the necessary strength. The wing had to be thick enough near the root to house the retracted undercarriage and guns. Mitchell, being a practical man, recognized that the elliptical shape allowed for the thinnest possible wing while providing room for the necessary internal structure and components. As a bonus, the elliptical shape was aesthetically pleasing. The wing section used was from the NACA 2200 series, adapted to create a thickness to chord ratio of 13% at the root, tapering to 9.4% at the tip. A dihedral angle of 6 degrees was incorporated to enhance lateral stability. The Spitfire's iconic elliptical wing design was a result of the design team's efforts to create a highly efficient and practical wing that could meet the aircraft's specific requirements while also being visually appealing. The Spitfire's wing design featured an innovative spar boom construction that contributed significantly to its success. The main spar was made up of 5 square tubes that fitted into each other, progressively cut away along the wing span, similar to a leaf spring. 2 of these booms were connected by an alloy web, resulting in a lightweight yet strong main spar. This design allowed the wing to be thin while maintaining its structural integrity. The undercarriage legs were attached to pivot points built into the inner, rear section of the main spar and retracted outwards and slightly backwards into wells in the non-load carrying wing structure. Although the resulting narrow undercarriage track was a compromise, it was considered acceptable as it reduced the bending loads on the main spar during landing. The thick-skinned leading edge of the wing, located ahead of the spar, formed a strong and rigid D-shaped box that bore most of the wing loads. Initially, This D-shaped leading edge was designed to house steam condensers for the evaporative cooling system intended for the PV-12 engine. However, due to constant problems with the evaporative system in the Goshawk engine, a cooling system using 100% glycol was adopted instead. The radiators were housed in a new radiator duct designed by Frederick Meredith of the Royal Aircraft Establishment, RAE, at Farnborough, Hampshire. This design utilized the cooling air to generate thrust, significantly reducing the net drag produced by the radiators. As a result, the leading edge structure no longer served as a condenser but was later adapted to house integral fuel tanks of various sizes, a feature patented by Vickers Supermarine in 1938. The airflow through the main radiator was controlled by pneumatic exit flaps. In early Spitfire marks, MKI to MKVI, a single flap was operated manually using a lever to the left of the pilot's seat. With the introduction of the two-stage Merlin engine in the Spitfire Mk9, the radiators were split to accommodate an intercooler radiator. The radiator under the starboard wing was reduced in size, and the intercooler radiator was housed alongside it. Under the port wing, a new radiator fairing housed a square oil cooler alongside the other half radiator unit. In this configuration, the two radiator flaps were operated automatically by a thermostat. The Spitfire's wing design incorporated another crucial feature known as washout. Along the wingspan, the wing's trailing edge was slightly twisted upward, resulting in a decrease in the angle of incidence from +2 degrees at the root to -0.5 degree at the tip. This ingenious design ensured that the wing roots would stall before the tips, minimizing the risk of tip stall, which could often lead to a wing drop and potentially a spin. As the wing roots began to stall, the separating airstream would start to buffet or vibrate the aircraft, alerting the pilot. This characteristic allowed even relatively inexperienced pilots to safely push the Spitfire to its performance limits. The washout feature was first introduced in the Type 224's wing and became a consistent element in subsequent designs, ultimately leading to the Spitfire. However, the wing's complex design, particularly the precision required to manufacture the critical spar and leading edge structures, initially caused significant delays in Spitfire production. These issues were exacerbated when the work was outsourced to subcontractors, many of whom had no prior experience with metal-structured, high-speed aircraft. By June 1939, most of these problems had been overcome, and wing shortages no longer hindered production. Originally, all of the Spitfire's main flight controls were metal structures with fabric covering. Designers and pilots believed that ailerons requiring some effort to move at high speeds would prevent unintended aileron reversal, which could throw the aircraft around and potentially tear the wings off. Additionally, it was thought that air combat would occur at relatively low speeds and that high-speed maneuvering would be physically impossible. However, flight tests revealed that the fabric covering on the ailerons ballooned at high speeds, negatively impacting the aircraft's aerodynamics. Replacing the fabric with light alloy significantly improved aileron performance at high speeds. During the Battle of Britain, pilots discovered that the Spitfire's ailerons were excessively heavy at high speeds, greatly limiting lateral maneuvers such as rolls and high-speed turns, which remained a crucial aspect of air-to-air combat. The Spitfire featured detachable wing tips, secured by two mounting points at the end of each main wing assembly. When the Spitfire was adapted for high-altitude rolls, Marks VI, 7, and some early MK-5s, the standard wing tips were replaced with extended, pointed tips. This modification increased the wingspan from 36 feet 10 in, 11.23 meters, to 40 feet 2 in, 12.24 meters, enhancing the aircraft's performance at higher altitudes. Another wingtip variation, used by several Spitfire variants, was the clipped wing. In this configuration, the standard wing tips were replaced by wooden fairings, reducing the span by 3 feet 6 in, 1.07 meters. The wing tips themselves were constructed using spruce formers for most of the internal structure, with a light alloy skin attached using brass screws. The Spitfire also featured light alloy split flaps at the trailing edge of the wing, which were pneumatically operated via a finger lever on the instrument panel. The flaps had only two positions, fully up or fully down, 85 degrees. Pilots typically lowered the flaps only during the final approach and landing, and were instructed to retract them before taxiing. The elliptical design also served as the basis for the Spitfire's fin and tailplane assembly, further exploiting the shape's favorable aerodynamic characteristics. Both the elevators and rudder were shaped to shift their center of mass forward, reducing control surface flutter. As larger engines were introduced in later models, the resulting longer noses and greater propeller wash necessitated increasingly larger vertical and, subsequently, horizontal tail surfaces to compensate for the altered aerodynamics. This design evolution culminated in the tail surfaces of the Mk-22-24 series, which were 25% larger in area than those of the Mki. As the Spitfire's power increased and pilots were able to maneuver at higher speeds, the risk of encountering aileron reversal grew. In response, the Supermarine design team set out to redesign the wings to mitigate this issue. The original wing design had a theoretical aileron reversal speed of 580 miles per hour, 930 kilometers per hour, which was lower than some contemporary fighters. The Royal Aircraft Establishment observed that at an indicated airspeed of 400 miles per hour, 640 kilometers per hour, approximately 65% of aileron effectiveness was lost due to wing twist. To address this problem, a new wing was designed for the Spitfire FMK-21 and its successors. The stiffness of the new wing was increased by 47%, and a new aileron design incorporating piano hinges and geared trim tabs raised the theoretical aileron reversal speed to an impressive 825 miles per hour, 1,328 kilometers per hour. In addition to the redesigned wing, Supermarine also experimented with modifying the original wing by raising the leading edge by 1 inch, 2.54 centimeters. The aim was to improve pilot visibility and reduce drag. This modified wing was tested on a variant called the FMK-23, sometimes referred to as Valiant. However, the performance gains were minimal, and the experiment was ultimately abandoned. In an effort to further reduce drag and enhance performance, Supermarine developed a new laminar flow wing based on airfoil profiles created by the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, in the United States. These laminar flow airfoils, designated as the Supermarine 371I at the root and the 371-2 at the tip, showed promise. Supermarine estimated that the new wing could potentially increase the Spitfire Mk-21 speed by 55 miles per hour, 89 kilometers per hour. Initially, the laminar flow wing was fitted to a Spitfire Mk-14. Later, a new fuselage was designed to complement the wing, resulting in the development of the Supermarine Spitfire. When designing the Merlin engine, Rolls Royce engineers made a deliberate choice to use a carburetor instead of fuel injection. Sir Stanley Hooker, in his autobiography, explained that the Germans paid a significant penalty for their use of fuel injection. In the Merlin engine, the fuel is fed before the supercharger, causing it to evaporate and cool the air by 25 degrees Celsius. This cooling effect enhances the supercharger's performance and increases the engine's power, resulting in a corresponding increase in aircraft speed, especially at high altitudes. However, the early Merlin engine's lack of fuel injection meant that Spitfires and Hurricanes, unlike the Bf-109E, could not simply nose down into a steep dive. When a Luftwaffe fighter bunted into a high-power dive to escape an attack, the Spitfire would be left behind as the negative G-forces caused the fuel to be forced out of the carburetor. To counter this, RAF fighter pilots learned to half-roll their aircraft before diving to pursue their opponents. In March 1941, a metal disc with a hole, known as Miss Schilling's orifice, was fitted in the fuel line to restrict fuel flow to the maximum the engine could consume. While this did not completely solve the initial fuel starvation problem during a dive, it did help reduce the more serious issue of the carburetor being flooded with fuel by the fuel pumps under negative G-forces. The device was invented by Beatrice Tilly Schilling. Further improvements were made throughout the Merlin series, with Bendix manufactured pressure carburetors introduced in 1942. These carburetors were designed to allow fuel to flow during all flight attitudes, addressing the fuel starvation issues encountered during extreme maneuvers. The Spitfire's armament evolved throughout its development, with early models being fitted with only 4 guns due to a shortage of Browning machine guns, which had been selected as the RAF's new standard rifle caliber machine gun in 1934. The remaining 4 guns were fitted later. Initial tests revealed that while the guns functioned perfectly on the ground and at low altitudes, they tended to freeze at high altitudes, particularly the outer wing guns. This issue stemmed from the RAF's decision to modify the Brownings to fire from an open bolt, which prevented overheating of the cordite used in British ammunition but allowed cold air to flow freely through the barrel. Supermarine addressed this problem in October 1938 by adding hot air ducts from the rear of the wing-mounted radiators to the guns and installing bulkheads around the gun bays to trap the hot air in the wing. To protect the guns from cold, dirt, and moisture until they were fired, red fabric patches were doped over the gun ports. The decision to arm the Spitfire, and the Hurricane, with 8 machine guns was made during a conference chaired by Air Commodore Tedder on July 19, 1934. At this meeting, Scientific Officer Captain F. W. Gunner Hill presented charts based on calculations showing that future fighters must carry at least 8 machine guns, each capable of firing 1,000 shots per minute. Hill's teenage daughter had assisted him in making these calculations. However, pilots soon discovered that even 8 perfectly functioning Brownings were insufficient to destroy larger aircraft. Combat reports indicated that an average of 4,500 rounds were needed to shoot down an enemy aircraft. By November 1938, tests against armored and unarmored targets had already highlighted the urgent need for a weapon with a caliber of at least 20 mm. In June 1939, a Spitfire was fitted with a drum-fed Hispano cannon in each wing, requiring large blisters to cover the 60-round drum. The cannons suffered from frequent stoppages, primarily because they were mounted on their sides to fit as much of the magazine as possible within the wing. In January 1940, P.O. George Proudman flew this prototype in combat, but experienced reliability issues with both cannons. Despite these problems, 30 more cannon-armed Spitfires, known as the MKIB, were ordered for operational trials and delivered to No. 19 Squadron in June 1940. The Hispano cannons proved to be so unreliable that the squadron requested to exchange their aircraft with older Browning-armed Spitfires from an operational training unit. By August, Supermarine had developed a more reliable installation with an improved feed mechanism and 4.303 machine guns in the outer wing panels. These modified fighters were then delivered to 19 Squadron. Throughout its service life, the Spitfire set numerous speed and altitude records, showcasing its exceptional performance capabilities. Some of the most notable records include 1. On February 5, 1941, a modified Spitfire Mk2, piloted by Flight Lieutenant Edward Tilly Tomlinson, set a new world altitude record, reaching 50,000 feet, 15,240 meters. This achievement demonstrated the Spitfire's ability to operate effectively at high altitudes, a crucial factor in intercepting high-flying enemy bombers. 2. In April 1944, a Spitfire Mk-11 flown by squadron leader J.R. Tobin achieved a maximum speed of 606 miles per hour, 975 kilometers per hour, in level flight, setting a new speed record for a piston-engined aircraft. This record highlighted the continuous improvements made to the Spitfire's design, particularly in terms of its streamlined airframe and powerful Rolls Royce Merlin engine. 3. On July 27, 1946, Group Captain Edward Teddy Donaldson, flying a Spitfire Mk-14, broke the world air speed record, reaching a speed of 616 miles per hour, 991 kilometers per hour, over a 3 kilometers course. This record-breaking flight further solidified the Spitfire's reputation as one of the fastest piston-engine fighters of its time. 4. In 1952, a Spitfire Mk-19 flown by Flight Lieutenant Edward Ted Powell set a new world altitude record for a piston-engined aircraft, reaching a height of 51,550 feet, 15,712 meters. This achievement demonstrated the longevity and adaptability of the Spitfire design, as well as its continued relevance in the early years of the jet age. These speed and altitude records not only showcased the Spitfire's remarkable performance but also served as a testament to the skill and bravery of the pilots who flew them. The Spitfire's ability to continually push the boundaries of what was thought possible for a piston-engine fighter aircraft cemented its status as an aviation icon and a symbol of British ingenuity and determination. Variants. R.J. Mitchell, the renowned engineer behind the Spitfire's design, passed away prematurely in 1937, leaving further development to a team led by his chief draftsman, Joe Smith, who became Supermarine's chief designer. Jeffrey Quill aptly noted, "If Mitchell was born to design the Spitfire, Joe Smith was born to defend and develop it." The Spitfire underwent numerous iterations, with 24 marks and many subvariants, covering the transition from Merlin to Griffin engines, high-speed photo-reconnaissance variants, and various wing configurations. The MKV was the most produced, with 6,487 built, followed by the MK9, with 5,656 produced. Different wings, accommodating a range of weapons, were fitted to most marks. The A-wing featured 8.303 in, 7.7 mm, machine guns, the B-wing had 4.303 in, 7.7 mm, machine guns and two 20 mm, .79 in, Hispano cannons, while the C, or universal, wing could mount either 420 mm, .79 in, cannons or a combination of two 20 mm, .79 in, and 4.303 in, 7.7 mm, machine guns. As the war progressed, the C-wing became increasingly common. Another variation was the E-wing, housing two 20 mm, .79 in, cannons and 2.50 in, 12.7 mm, Browning machine guns. Despite continuous improvements in speed and armament, the Spitfire's limited fuel capacity restricted its range and endurance throughout its service life, except in the dedicated photo reconnaissance role, where guns were replaced by additional fuel tanks. Supermarine developed a two-seat variant, the TMK-8, for training purposes, but no orders were placed, and only one example was built, identified as N32/G8 by Supermarine. Due to the absence of an official two-seater, some airframes were crudely converted in the field, such as a 4-squadron SOF MKVB in North Africa, which had its upper fuel tank replaced with a second seat, though it lacked dual controls and was likely used as a squadron runabout. The only unofficial two-seat conversions with dual controls were a few Russian lend/lease Mk9 aircraft, referred to as Mk9 UTI, featuring an inline greenhouse-style double canopy instead of the raised bubble type of the TMK-8. After the war, Supermarine revived the idea and built several two-seat Spitfires by converting old Mk9 airframes with a second raised cockpit and bubble canopy. 10 of these TR9 variants were sold to the Indian Air Force, 6 to the Irish Air Corps, 3 to the Royal Netherlands Air Force, and 1 to the Royal Egyptian Air Force. Today, several trainers are known to exist, including the TMK-8, a TMK-9 based in the US, and the Grace Spitfire ML407, a veteran flown operationally by 485 NZ Squadron in 1944. The Seafire, a naval version of the Spitfire, was specially adapted for aircraft carrier operations. Although not designed for carrier use, it was considered the best available fighter at the time. The Spitfire's design imposed some limitations, such as poor visibility over the nose, requiring pilots to land with their heads out of the cockpit. The Seafire's narrow undercarriage track also made it less than ideal for deck operations. Early Seafire marks had few modifications, but later versions featured strengthened airframes, folding wings, arrestor hooks, and other changes, culminating in the purpose-built Seafire F/FR Mk47. During wartime mock combat exercises, the Seafire II outperformed the A6M50 at low altitudes. However, Allied carrier fighters like the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair were more robust and practical for carrier operations. Performance greatly increased when later Seafire versions received Griffin engines, but these arrived too late for World War II service. The first Griffin engine Spitfire, the Mk12, flew in August 1942 and entered operational service with 41 Squadron in April 1943. It could reach nearly 400 miles per hour, 640 kilometers per hour, and climb to 33,000 feet, 10,000 meters, in under 9 minutes. As American fighters took over long-range escort duties, Griffin engine Spitfires assumed the tactical air superiority role and intercepted V-1 flying bombs. Merlin engine variants, mainly the Mk9 and Packard-engined Mk16, became fighter bombers. Although later Griffin engine marks lost some favorable handling characteristics, they could still outmaneuver their main German foes and other American and British-designed fighters. The final Spitfire version, the Mk24, first flew on April 13, 1946, and the last production Spitfire, VN496, left the line on February 20, 1948. Only one regular RAF unit, 80 Squadron, used Mk24s, replacing their Hawker Tempests in 1947 for patrol and reconnaissance duties in Germany and later Hong Kong during the Chinese Civil War. Spitfires flew over 1,800 sorties against Malayan communists during Operation Firedog in the Malayan Emergency. The last operational RAF Spitfire sortie was on April 1, 1954, and the last non-operational flight was on June 9, 1957, marking the end of piston-engined fighters in the RAF. Syria was the last Middle Eastern nation to operate Spitfires, keeping its FMK-22s until 1953. In late 1962, Air Marshal Sir John Nichols conducted a trial pitting a Spitfire PR Mk19 against an English Electric Lightning F3 interceptor to develop tactics against the Indonesian Air Force P-51 Mustangs. The trial concluded that the best way for a modern jet fighter to attack a piston-engined fighter was to use full afterburner at a lower altitude and circle behind it for a hit-and-run attack. According to the main article list of surviving Supermarine Spitfires, a significant number of Spitfires have survived into preservation due to the aircraft's extensive use in World War II and its iconic status. As of 2023, 240 Spitfires are preserved, including around 60 airworthy planes. Many air museums feature Spitfires on static display, such as Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry, which has paired a static Spitfire with a Ju-87R2/Trop. Stuka dive bomber. The oldest surviving Spitfire is a Mark I, serial number K9942, preserved at the Royal Air Force Museum Cosford in Shropshire. This aircraft, The 155th built, first flew in April 1939 and served operationally with No. 72 Squadron RAF until June 1940, when it was damaged in a wheels-up landing. After repair, it was used for training until August 1944, when it was allocated to the Air Historical Branch for future museum preservation. One of the most meticulously restored Spitfires is maintained at Fantasy of Flight in Polk City, Florida. Over a 6-year period in the 1990s, Personal Plane Services in England restored this aircraft using nearly 90% of its original skins. The owner, Kermit Weeks, insisted on restoring the aircraft as closely as possible to its original condition, complete with machine guns, cannon, gun sight, and working radios. 2 flying Mk-1 Supermarine Spitfires, restored by the Aircraft Restoration Company, are based at the Imperial War Museum Duxford in Cambridgeshire, England. American billionaire Thomas Kaplan restored both aircraft, donating one to the Imperial War Museum and auctioning the second at Christie's, London, in July 2015. The auctioned Spitfire, one of only 4 flying Mk-1 Spitfires in the world, set a new record price of £3.1 million, surpassing the previous record of £1.7 million set in 2009. The Imperial War Museum Duxford is home to the largest collection of Spitfires, with 15 to 20 airworthy and static examples on site most weeks throughout the year. It is also rumored that there are anywhere from 5 to 10 ongoing restoration projects on site between the fighter collection and the Aircraft Restoration Company. In 1979, Carolyn Grace and her husband Nick purchased a Spitfire model ML407. Carolyn Grace subsequently flew the Spitfire in several displays, including one commemorating the 60th anniversary of D-Day in 2004. Thanks for watching, The Animated General. Out.